Welcome, welcome, welcome. You are all in the right place. You're all doing the right thing. We wanted you to come and meet each other and chat, but I just want to get your attention to the front of the room as we begin our program this evening.
Raj, they are having just way too much fun.
They seem
just
like they're having a blast.
Way too much fun.
They are.
I kind of feel like we're cutting in, like we're breaking up their date here.
We've got a good reason to do it, though.
Yeah. I also feel like we have a good reason. I mean, you guys all came here for some great conversations, but we also want to spike the punch a little bit, right?
That's right. And we're going to make you work a little bit for that spike punch and for the lovely food and reception, because we actually want you to do some work at these tables.
Yes, so we can move us forward. This is important.
That's right. Well, let me just say, I'm Raj Kumar. I'm the president and editor-in-chief at Devex, and I'm joined here by Julie Teigland, my compadre and ally for this
partner
event.
in crime.
Partner in crime. And Julie is sort of like the global ambassador at large at EY, global vice chair, runs all good things that you see happening at EY, including events like this.
I'm excited to be here with you, Raj. I feel like we've got a fantastic agenda.
I do too.
And a great thing going.
Yeah. Why don't you tell them about how lucky they are to be in the room?
Oh my God, I was going to start off. He's stealing my thunder. It's unbelievable. Co-host, we got to get this under control. But I have some really good news to kick off with you. The first good news is that we had over 500 applicants to this event, of which we were only able to choose from 60 for fire reasons. So you are incredibly lucky to be here, and I mean that seriously, actually. So please, can you guys make some noise? I mean, you are the selected group here. I feel like I should take their picture, Raj, so that they know how lucky they are.
I think you're right. And it is an impressive group. We've actually seen the list. It's quite an impressive group you're surrounded by.
It's so true. So if that was the good news, are you ready for the bad news? They're all sitting down, so I guess I can say it. Raj, it means that there's a lot of pressure on us in the room, right? Because what we do tonight, what we discuss here at this table, has to create a ripple out there. So I want you to remember that. I'm kind of holding that as a pin. There's a little bit of pressure on all of us here. And I think the timing for this session, Raj, couldn't be better. It couldn't be better in terms of where we're going. Raj, if I could open this up and kick off and say, I feel like this event and the mood in the city, the mood outside, kind of reminds me of an 80th birthday party. No. How many of you have been at an 80th birthday party? Raise your hand. Okay, the mood was, I'm going to try to get this right. It's a little bit celebratory, right? You're celebrating the birthday, everybody's singing, you're feeling incredibly prideful on all of the great accomplishments. You look through the fantastic photo book, you're seeing all the kids and all the great things that were done. Am I right so far? But it's a bit bittersweet, right? Why? Because in an 80th birthday, you're kind of entering the last chapter. You're thinking about the legacy and what you're going to leave. Am I right? Do you feel that in New York now? Okay, but I am standing up here to tell you that is wrong. We are not celebrating the 80th birthday of a person. We are celebrating the 80th birthday of the United Nations. And 80 years is a drop in the bucket in the history of time. It's 80 years, yes, to look back, to be celebratory, to be prideful about what's been accomplished. But we're here to design the next 80, and the next 80 after that, and that long legacy. Am I right? So my ask of all of you, before we kick this off and get started, is yes, let's celebrate like it's 80 years, but let's celebrate like we've got to do that exponentially for 80 plus more, designing the legacy that's going to happen. Now, if we really want to make those 80 years, and I'm counting on all of you to get the next 80, I like to think of it like a birthday cake. I like cake. Do you guys like cake? Yes. All right. In my cake, there are 3 layers of things that we need to drive in terms of change. And I want you to think about that as we're going through the session. Raj, we need to drive systemic change. Do you guys agree? Systemic change. It's not change just brushed on the top. It's really designing how we deal with stakeholders and ecosystems and technology to change the system. Number 2, second layer of my birthday cake. To drive change, we need to have change at the organizational level. Are we right? And at the organizational level, I am telling you, I talked about that pressure. There is more pressure at the organizational level today than ever before. Legitimacy is called into question at a number of organizations. Resources are extremely tight. Costs are under pressure. And we need to respond to that need for transformation. The third level of my birthday cake is the most important. It's the change that we drive as leaders. We need leadership in this room and beyond to drive the change that we need if we want to celebrate another 80th birthday. And that's probably the most important to me. Raj, I am an incredibly optimistic person.
We need some of that.
My glass sitting there at that table, if you can look at it, I know many of you can't, you just have to trust me a little bit here. It's more than half full. I see this as an opportunity. There are so many smart minds in this room that I'm confident we can design a path for the next 80 addressing all 3 layers of the cake. And I am super proud, incredibly proud, about the group of people in this room, Raj, that brings together both public and private sectors. I've worked my whole career in the private sector, but I am absolutely committed to collaboration, to impact, and to driving change together with all you. I have not changed that in the last 35 years. And so with that, Raj is my partner in crime and my co-host. I'm going to kick it over to you, but I'm going to come back because I want to hear about the 3 layers of the cake and the plan to get that next 80 years together. And with that, Raj, the stage is all yours, my friend.
Thank you, Julie. Please, a round of applause for Julie Teigland. And Julie will be back up here to keep us honest after this panel. I want to ask my panelists to join me up on stage, if you would. Come on up. I see some of you in the crowd, so I know you're here. Let's see, John Hewko, where are you? There you are, John. Come on down. Justina Nixon-Saintil is with us. Have a seat. Go ahead, wherever you like. Pass that down for me. Let's see, Navid Hanif is here, of course, Navid. I don't see my last panelist, but has he arrived yet? Alexander de Croo? Maybe not? Okay, when he comes, he'll join us. Go ahead, have a seat, everybody. I want to dive into this discussion. It's a very live and active discussion, Navid, particularly for you at the UN. You're an Assistant Secretary General for UN DESA. The UN is going through a reform process. I either hear from people who say it's nowhere near ambitious enough, or from people who say way too many people are going to be fired as a result of this. We're talking about reimagining. That's the frame we want to use, and we're going to come to all of you at your tables to really dive into that at a table level and to think through, well, what would it mean to reimagine multilateralism? What's the conversation like inside the UN right now, Navid, on this topic? Are there people who are not just looking at the challenging realities, but also imagining what a multilateralism 2.0 could actually look like?
I think I will thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you this evening, and thanks to EY also. I will use your analogy of these 3 layers of the cake. What the Secretary General is saying, and that comes across very clearly in the progress report that he has just issued, that don't get a new app, change the operating system. That's his vision. And that's what he's doing through his report. He has presented as many ideas as he could, but there's an open invitation because we are governed by member states.
And you're referring to a report that just came out a few days ago.
Yeah, it's about paradigm shifts uniting for delivery. That's the title. So he wants to change the operating system. He doesn't believe in a new app anymore. But he wants member states to be in the lead. So he has presented ideas, whatever he could, but he wants ambitious and bold ideas from member states. There's an open invitation. Now, multilateralism and its future. I couldn't agree more. You're not celebrating an older person's 80th birthday. It's a system that you will need, as long as humanity exists, you will need to convene, you will need to negotiate, you will need to find solutions. The other option is wars and conflict, and you don't want that, right? So no matter in what form it exists, you will always, I always say, our purposes are timeless, our structures are not timeless. So that's the issue about multilateralism. We need it. Form will change, structures will change, and those should always change. And that is the message from the United Nations. Let me end on the development side, because I cannot speak on peace and security and human rights. On development cooperation, it's not going anywhere, and I'm not just being naive optimist. Three factors come into play. First, we have always seen people coming together even before the UN. ILO was created way before the United Nations. That there will be shared problems that we will need to solve together in whatever way we come together. So it's not going anywhere. Second, we may downplay it. Solidarity as a public value still has a lot of supporters. For humanitarian crises, for disasters, you will see groundswell of support among people on the basis of solidarity. Third, mutual interest is not going anywhere. Two countries coming together to pursue mutual interests through projects and fun. So development cooperation is here to stay. So I don't want to hog the microphone. I'll come to it, how we are reshaping it, a severe commitment coming out on financing for development, and a number of other ideas in the progress report. For instance, resetting regional presence, totally redesigning country teams of the United Nations, resident coordinator system needs to be strengthened. So these are ideas which I can share with you in the second round. Thank you.
I know there's a lot of people in this room who will be very pleased to hear development cooperation is not going away. This has been a challenging year ever since we broke that first story in January that DOGE was going to put a stop work order on all U.S. foreign assistance, right? It's been a very challenging year. And in this room, we have some of the leaders of major institutions that implement projects around the world in development cooperation and humanitarian response. And I think you're right. I think although it's very challenging and it's going to look very different, there is a future development cooperation. I had a taxi driver here in New York once. I've been coming to UN General Assembly 15 years, and we were sitting in the worst traffic that you've all experienced. And he looked at me and he said, "Is any of this worth it? You know, what do you guys actually do here?" And I said, "We wonder the same thing sometimes, but it's better than war, right? It's better than the alternative." Justina, I want to come to you because you're the Chief Impact Officer at IBM, and you've got to work with lots of governments and companies around the world on this idea of digital transformation, which is, I think, embedded in what we're talking about here. How do we reimagine multilateralism? And that future has got to have a technology component to it. How are you thinking about that from your perch?
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, we work all over the world, and my focus is on how do we advance economic opportunity. Also, we are very focused on responsible technology and what that means, and then also building local capacity. So if you think about those three things in the age of AI, which is accelerating at a pace we've never seen before, we need multilateralism. We need partnerships, right, all over the world to be able to advance those three areas. So the way that we're looking at it on the economic development and economic opportunity side is, how do we make sure we invest in skills? We know that skills are going to be the currency around our AI economies. What does that look like? How do we work with universities and colleges and K-12 school systems, and also adults who need to be reskilled and upskilled so that they are able to be successful in the workforce. So a huge part of the work we do globally is how do we make sure that people have the right skills, because we know that leads into healthy economies, right? Healthy communities, and definitely healthy ecosystems. So we work with governments to align. I mean, this is a part of every government's national agenda. Skills, and how do we make sure we support them. So we work with them on different targets, goals around skilling. We leverage their partnership, right, to make sure we're connecting what is needed, the competencies needed, the credentials needed in the workforce to what the school systems and the education systems are doing. And really our focus is how do we make sure people are being moved into the right jobs, right, especially in this AI age. On the responsible tech side, same thing. How do we make sure our solutions, right, are trustworthy? How do we make sure that the data and the insights that we have as part of our partnerships belong with the creator, right? And how do we make sure that that AI is being used to augment human intelligence and not to replace it? So those are our guiding principles. And we also work with partners all over the world on those guiding principles when we consider the types of solutions that we offer. So very focused on those areas, and those things are not possible without these types of partnerships.
Yeah, I think it's easy to forget that if you came here on an airplane, you can thank the UN, because the only reason we have an interoperable system of planes and air traffic control, et cetera, is because there is a multilateral system to organize that. Or if you make a phone call or connect to the internet, right, it's because there is a system that's governed globally that allows that all to work. And now with AI, it's a similar story where you're going to see potentially this umbrella of regulations and an environment that is made possible by the multilateral system advantage business, advantage markets in the private sector, and the UN could get left behind if they don't take advantage of this opportunity themselves, right, to accelerate. John, you're one of the few people who's actually built a startup inside government, right? You helped to create the Millennium Challenge Corporation. I think there's probably some real fans of the MCC here, which has gone through a tough year, but it's still around. Yes. Those of you who know the Millennium Challenge Corporation, you are now, of course, the CEO of Rotary International and Secretary General there. Given that you kind of know what it takes to start up something inside government, what is your view on how we can change something that's as hard to change as the multilateral system? I mean, it can feel very bureaucratic, very heavy, so many member states with all of their own ideas. How do we actually advance this into multilateralism 2.0?
Yeah, it's the same challenge I face within Rotary, because we are in effect a sort of a mini UN. We got about 1.2 million members in 200 some countries and locations. Probably not very few places in the world where you don't see a Rotary club, but we have been able to make an impact. Largely because I think we've created, in effect, a version of people-to-people multilateralism, and I think that's going to be an extremely important element as we move forward in this discussion on multilateralism. In fact, it was, Rotary was established in 1905, the first club in Chicago, really as LinkedIn before anybody had heard of LinkedIn. And we started adding to that this sort of service component over the years. And in the 1930s, Rotary began, really as very few organizations had at that time, to focus on that, lasting peace is not so much a function of treaties, it's not so much a function of governmental agreements, but a function of people-to-people contact, literacy, focus on freedom of information, human rights. And it's really through those principles that Rotary was advocating for that UNESCO, for example, was created. And there were sort of 45 Rotarians that were part of the drafting commissions in 1945 in San Francisco when the UN Charter was being developed. And so I think the partnership between the multilateral official structures and what I would say people-to-people multilateral institutions and organizations like Rotary that exist out there are going to be absolutely critical. And we do have one huge success story that I'd like to point out, and that is the polio eradication effort. That Rotary really began back in 1985, and we were joined by UNICEF, CDC, WHO, and more recently Gavi and the Gates Foundation. And we've brought the world to the brink of eradicating polio precisely because of that union between what I would say people-to-people multilateralism and the official multilateral structures. But it's not easy, as you said, Raj, and you've got a lot of different constituencies, points of view. Within Rotary, 1.2 million Rotarians, 1.4 million points of view, and the same within the UN structure. I don't have the magic bullet, but I do know that when we were setting up MCC, what was very important was to really maintain that bipartisan focus. to focus on principles that both parties across the aisle could agree on, and focus on the issue of private sector engagement. We always said at MCC, our exit strategy is the private sector. If MCC is still around in 50 years, we failed. Because the whole point was to sustainable economic growth through the U.S. interventions at MCC. So I can't give you the magic bullet, but I can say it's going to require more than just at the governmental level. It's going to require the engagement of organizations such as Rotary if we're really going to come up with a new multilateralism 2.0 that works.
I like this message that we kind of think about networks maybe, not just institutions, and especially if we want to use technology that works more through networks than through institutions. And it does require a shift in our mindset. You mentioned, Navid, the Secretary General's line about we're not building an app, it's a new operating system. What do you, when listening to these other panelists, what do you think, Navid, ultimately is this big new operating system vision? What is that all about? And does it incorporate people outside of the UN? Is it really open to private sector, to civil society groups, to the tech players of the world? Is that as expansive as the vision actually is, or does it need to become more expansive?
Well, I couldn't agree more with John. If you look at the report on our common future, networked multilateralism is one of the key outcomes from the Pact for the Future. But Raj, let's be, and I'm not here to defend the UN, because UN needs to improve, and I'm on that with you. But just go back when Kofi Annan launched the Global Compact. We had not seen private sector CEOs coming to the UN 26 years ago. Now look, have you seen any meeting at the United Nations where CEOs not invited? They're not part of the conversation. In Seville, they were running the show on financing for development. So UN has come a long way, thanks to member states also, in opening. Actually, UN must also acknowledge you cannot solve problem unless the key actors are around the table. You can't make rules about technology unless they are sitting with you and telling you what needs to be governed. So I think UN is absolutely open. Member states are very keen to engage all stakeholders and work with them to first develop norms and then implement with their help. But it won't happen overnight. So there I want to bring to your attention, it sounds very technical, it's called Quintet of Change, UN 2.0. It begins with changing the mindset, first and foremost. Then you have the foresight to see what's coming your way, and then using data to design policies, and then coming with implementation, which is measurable in terms of its impact. So let me give you two quick examples. How do we need to change? I will focus on the delivery at the country level. As of now, and this was in 2017 very clearly conveyed by the Secretary General, UN system is inefficient. There is resource utilization which can be improved significantly. How? We do not need 26 agencies to sit in a country, to support a country. We should have a model which is designed for that country's needs, not by what we have to offer, not a supply-side model. And SC wants to go there, that I want to bring it down to 10 or 8 who are absolutely needed in a country. Second, pool their resources. Don't waste in unnecessary competition, duplication, and overlap. It's not rocket science, it's doable. So pooling of resources. Third, please do not tell the country what to do. Country ownership, their leadership, and align with their goals. Shape them to the Sustainable Development Goals, but align with it so that there's ownership to achieve progress. And let's hold yourself accountable. Impact measurement, which you just mentioned. We rarely report impact in terms of at the country level. We report impact at the headquarters level. So this is one shift which we are pushing, and in the progress report, there's a clear roadmap for that, which the Deputy Secretary General will lead, and we are confident we'll have bold proposals in redesigning country presence and minimizing resource wastage and measuring impact and delivering for people. That's the vision we have, and hopefully it will be realized before the end of next year.
So much of this comes down to systems. I'm picturing these 26 offices in a country. Some of us have visited these places, you know. You see one UN logo over there, another UN agency over there. Merging them sounds simple enough when you're thinking about the real estate. When you're thinking about the function, the technology behind it, it always would seem too difficult. Every system has its own purpose, every organization has its own operating culture. But now I wonder with AI, Justina, is there a new moment now where these organizations that might have seemed very difficult to reimagine from a digital transformation standpoint, using very old legacy systems? I understand there's still systems in the US federal government that are running on fax machines. Is there a moment where you could say, actually, we can pretty quickly move this around? And if that's true, what do you need? When you're meeting with an agency like that, what do you need for them to understand to do this?
Yeah, a huge focus of ours is on how do we work with the UN agencies to accelerate innovation. So we have a partnership, for example, with UNDP, where we've worked with them on using our models and our AI and our expertise to create forecasts around, for example, clean energy. So we're working with them on initiatives around clean energy in Kenya. We work in India around sustainable agriculture, in Brazil around waste management and sanitation, and how do we use AI to actually really make a difference for those communities. So we are very focused on accelerating innovation using AI and our expertise. In the area of how do you become more efficient and productive, that's an area that we are using ourselves as client zero. And we are sharing this information with the UN, with many of our partners. So for example, we deployed a system called Ask HR within our own company, IBM, and that's focused on leveraging technology to really provide support to employees so that we do not need to continuously engage one-on-one with a person to answer some basic questions we have, or to even implement some things that we need to do from an HR perspective. We've implemented AI agents. We've done it on the social impact side as well. I support 300,000 employees around employee giving and volunteerism in our communities. We've implemented Ask CSR to be able to help our employees. So I do think that there are ways that you can use AI to be more efficient, and also to analyze data and see where there are gaps and where you could look at different systems and how do you bring those all together. So I do think on the internal side, there's a huge opportunity for AI, and we're seeing it in our own company. And then on the external side, how do you really push on the innovation? We have worked with a lot of UN agencies. Sometimes it takes a while to get there, to really focus on what this means for the community. How can we do something different? How can we use these new technologies? And again, at the pace that AI is accelerating, there's really a sense of urgency to figure that out and figure out how we can benefit those local communities.
If you think about a lot of what multilateral institutions like the UN do, economic analysis, data collection, there's a lot of opportunity to move that toward AI systems, and then to take the resources that are saved and deploy them on the ground in the countries, right, where Navid is saying the needs actually exist in a more efficient way. John, you get the last word. As we start to think about this group that we're going to send soon to their tables to think about what do you actually do tangibly. We talked about networks, we talked about technology, we talked about kind of reimagining the model. What are some final thoughts you've got to kind of send us toward the possibility of what we can do here?
Well, again, let me just focus on the sort of the narrow area that I actually have some experience in, and mention the Millennium Challenge Corporation. I think that is a principle on which development assistance in general needs to be structured around, where you earn your way into it. I mean, I've always felt there should be two worlds. One is dealing with disaster response, immediate needs, tornadoes, floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, etc. And then the rest is focused using MCC principles. And country ownership, you earn your way into it, accountability. And when I was at MCC, we were halfway through the compacts with Nicaragua and Madagascar, and we cut them off halfway through. And that's unheard of in the international development space. And so my final thought is on that sort of narrow issue of international development as we rethink multilateralism 2.0. I think MCC offers the model, or certainly a model on which we need to build going forward. The traditional ways, I would argue, have not been as successful as we would have hoped.
Well, you'll be happy to know there is a proposal in the Congress to create these compacts, and they appear in the America First Global Health Policy that was just issued this week, that talk about a very similar model to MCC, where the U.S. government, for its global health work, would partner directly with countries and co-finance, et cetera. So there is some traction for that idea.
And if you remember, you and I did a piece in the Washington Post probably 10 years ago, because at that time there was all this talk about cutting and everything, and we argued for the fact that let's internationalize MCC and make it a multilateral institution, in effect, on the sort of bedrock MCC principles. Didn't get any traction.
They only listened.
Maybe now is the time to think that, resuscitate that piece we did.
That's right. Well, listen, we've run out of time, but I want you all to give this great panel a round of applause, and we are going to continue the conversation. Thank you. And I'll ask Julie to pop up here. Okay, so what did you think? Are we on track when you listen to that discussion? What are we missing as we get closer to giving everybody this assignment at their breakout tables?
Maybe this one. Oh.
There you go.
Listen, I thought that was a great panel. If I had to take three things away from that, I would say the following. First, I know that all of you sit in your own organizations and you look at it, change is really hard. This is hard. It's not easy, and it's especially hard when you're living through it. If I could give you some level of comfort, I recognize some of those changes, especially those that you were highlighting in our own organization of running a professional service organization across 140 different countries. We go through the same thing in terms of trying to get the balance right between being a global organization and making sure that you're doing things that are fit for purpose on the ground, even if you have a multidisciplinary practice. We're not that different. I think some of the solutions that were outlined here are fantastic. I would highlight just one more point, and I think it's really important for us to remember in this room. We are breaking some glass, which is actually true, but I do want to say, yes, give them a hand, please. That is hard. We are the last generation in this room to actually be able to live in a world without AI, and the first generation to live in a world with it at the very same time. And if I reflect on that panel, that means actually that we have all the data, we have all the tools, and we have all the technology we need. We might have a lot of excuses, but we certainly have the backpack full of things that we need. It's not for the short of ideas, it's for the toughness of the execution on the ground to make this happen.
It's a people and a processes kind of a challenge, right? It's not that the technology doesn't exist, but these are complex in any organization. And then you layer into it the fact that it's a complicated world. Geopolitically, it's complicated. These institutions have so many member states with their own views. How do you begin to tackle that and do what Navid called, an operating system kind of reboot? How do you think about it?
I'm going to say, I think I'm going to come back to my cake. I think if the recipe needs a few things. Number one, I fundamentally believe that multilateralism only exists on a basis of trust. If there is no trust in the system, we can try to sugarcoat it with icing, but it's not going to work. So in my recipe, you have to have trust. You will not be surprised that I say in today's world, in that recipe, you must have technology, not just as an enabler, but as a multiplier of trust, especially if I think of what we can achieve in the positive sense with AI or blockchain, how we could infuse trust throughout that system. And then I'm going to say something very strange. I'm going to say you need the third thing. You need to make it personal. And what do I mean by that? it's no longer about global stakeholder management. It's no longer about states. As a matter of fact, I just read, interestingly, by 2050, 80 to 90% of the world is going to live in cities. So I would argue our stakeholders have changed. But let's be honest, in today's world of social media, of personalization, you must make it personal for this to succeed. Personal to the leaders, personal to the people involved. It has to be a win-win. So 3 things in my cake: trust, technology, and last but not least, it must be made personal to make this happen.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic point. I was just with 3 of the candidates who ran for Secretary General last time around, didn't make it. There were 3 out of 7 women who ran. There was a majority of the candidates were women. They didn't make it. I know you've been a big leader on gender equality inside EY, and they are pushing for this time around, the next Secretary General to be a woman. And one of the arguments they made that really resonates with what you just said is just the symbolism of having a woman for the first time lead this institution will help people who are out there who are kind of distrustful of organizations and distrustful of institutions to have a personal connection, to kind of look at, oh, there's something happening here, and I can connect to that. It's different, right? And I do think we are in an era when people don't trust institutions. They trust individuals that they happen to trust. And that makes all of this that much harder when you're talking about building a new multilateralism 2.0 with institutions that were designed in a different era of trust.
I completely agree. But Raj, I want to hear from you. I mean, have all of you gotten his new book on changing the world? I'm serious. This man is changing the world bit by bit every day, not only in our conversations.
Writing about others, at least changing the world.
Yeah, but come on. By writing about others and by bringing that to life, you're also bringing that across to all of us. I think it's amazing what you've been able to do, and I'd like to hear from you. What's your perspective on all of this?
You know, I think that because the United States is in this very unusual position, and we're going to hear tomorrow morning from the president, I think the leverage it has of saying, hey, we're not going to fund the UN. We can cut back on our 22% contribution, which is a very big portion of the budget. I think that's going to spur a debate like we haven't seen before. And I think there's a chance to take that opportunity in a way, not one anybody would have wanted to see, but take it and to say, let's do a massive, major reform. Let's really rethink the operating system. What I fear could happen instead is a multi-phase reform where the institution fights back and does the minimum necessary to get through another year. And then the situation politically in Europe gets a little bit worse. There's a little less funding for multilaterals, and they have to do another reform, and another reform, and another reform.
Isn't that what we call a death by 1,000 cuts?
It is. And I'm sure you've seen this in companies as well, that there's a moment, there's a window to do a reform and do it right. And if you miss that, it can be much more painful. And so my fear is you end up cutting into the core functions of the UN system, further worsening the trust in the institution because it won't be able to respond in the way the publics expect. So I do think we're at an interesting and important moment for the leaders who are gathering in New York. And I think one opportunity out of this session is to help bring out some ideas of what would be a way of reframing. You know, I thought your point that we're the first generation to live without AI and the first one to live with AI is a really interesting reframing of a topic we hear all the time, right? And it makes you stop and think, how can we reframe this really challenging question? Because the way it's framed today makes it very hard for the leaders across the street here to actually make progress.
Raj, am I allowed to just ask them? Because I think you hit on 2 really important points in this room. One, do you think it's right that we're at a tipping point? Can I just see a show of hands? Are we at a tipping point? Okay, so I would say majority. And do you see the risk that it's a death by 1,000 cuts? And I'm going to frame it like this. Who thinks the UN will go towards radical transformation? And I heard a lot of those propositions here on the stage, new models, where we need to go, how we do it. Who thinks we're going to go there, and who thinks death by 1,000 cuts? So I'm going to start by the positive. Who thinks radical change?
Couple of hands.
Oh my God, we need to pass out more alcohol. Who thinks death by 1,000 cuts? Oh, I'm going to have to order at the bar, Raj. It's definitely a downside. That's why we're going to do the test again later, because I'm confident with the breakout groups, we're going to get some great ideas, right?
So.
Should we talk about those groups?
Let's do it. So
I gotta use my sheet.
You are sitting at tables now which already have a card in front of you that tells you what the title of that breakout is all about. If you want to move, you can move, okay? You have that opportunity. But we're not going to take an hour to do it. You've got like a minute.
You got to really shift. If you want to change conversations, you're going to have to get up and scramble.
Okay, these are the topics. Future-proof operating models. Okay? Yeah, wave if you have that table. So right here in the front.
Please stand up or wave to make future-proof is in the front.
Technology as an enabler and co-designer. Okay? Building common ground in a multipolar world. All right? Cities, civil society, and the power of networked multilateralism. And we heard about how many people are going to be living in cities. And then sustainable financing. All the way there in the back corner. So at each of your tables, you've got a breakout leader, and you've got an EY expert. And you're going to have a conversation, and then we're going to report back, and we're going to hear what we learned from these tables and these conversations. And I hope, to your point, we've got a little more optimism at the end of this about what is possible. And I encourage you to use that frame of what is possible, not just what is difficult, because we all know that about this moment.
Let's look forward. What could we do? Not just what's possible, what could we do in terms of, has to be actionable, Raj, because otherwise we walk out of here with pie in the sky ideas, and I see some rolling eyes already, and they'll be back ordering things at the bar. We've got to be really clear about what we want to get out of this. Is that a fair challenge?
That's fair.
Are you guys ready to go? Raj, I almost feel like we should set a stopwatch.
We will. We'll come up and tell you. It's going to be fast-paced. Your breakout leads will tell you the timing. It's going to be fast-paced, and then we're going to all hear what we learned across this room, and then we're going to have those cocktails.
Okay, so I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, round of applause for the awesome panel, for the excellent job, and switch if you want to go.
You're going to move, now's your chance. Okay, I've heard some great conversations. I hate to stop them, but I hope there wasn't like a brilliant idea that was about to come out and I've stopped you. But we're ready to hear what you've all come up with. Okay, who's ready for that? Yeah, are you hearing me? People like this idea? Yeah? Okay, wait.
Hi, Raj.
I see a mic has just come over. Wait, which table are you at?
I am building common ground in a multipolar world. I'm going to be really quick because Mary and I decided to be hyper efficient and just manage our tables and not do
I am not surprised at all. Not surprised.
Do the combined thing. So building common ground in a multipolar world, we decided to focus on young people. And so that helped us take a big problem and try to narrow it a little bit. Our key challenges is trust. There's a disconnect. Quite honestly, these generations that are coming up right now aren't focused on the common ground. We're not going to blame them for it. They have grown up in an environment that we can't imagine, and so we have to communicate and activate them differently. So one of the solutions we discussed was really having the UN focus, coordinating what their competitive advantage is, the way that you talked about the airline industry, telecommunications. Seems tech and AI is going to be a really sweet space for the UN to be able to show their leadership and directly communicate with young people. And apparent from an overall perspective, I think the UN needs to be honest about the overreach that they have on certain issues, and that honesty will probably go a long way with young people. And a couple of actionable recommendations was recognizing that because they don't have this common ground with us on these issues right now, we need to talk to them and communicate with them where they're at, and really focusing in on high school and college students and having them get activated more in the issues around the SDGs.
Love it. Yeah, how about a round of applause? That was fantastic. You're making me think, Penny, next time we should have some young people here. I was at an event yesterday, and there were a bunch of real leaders and experts and a couple of young people who taught us about the issues, and it was really refreshing. I mean, they opened our minds. Mary.
Okay, is that on? All right, great. So I think I'm going to pick up from the trust issue. So that also was kind of the glue here around the solutioneering and where we find a more innovative approaches to multilateralism and to multi-sector, multi-actor solutions. And I think we had a great table because we had civil society and NGO represented, a public-private partnership, our colleague, the ambassador of global health from Sweden, so MFA, Sweden, and private sector working in Africa on health solutions. So across that space, kind of the lessons learned was, you know, I think we started with understanding everybody at the table has to understand they benefit from the outcome. So there's a lot of, you know, that once, if that glue is there, then there's an easier way to get to this solution. The multi-stakeholder approach, everybody has a piece of the puzzle and understanding what piece that is, and when it comes together, you have new solutions to existing intractable problems. The challenges, I think, that you suggested, the traditional models, the kind of dependence that has been developed around the traditional models, and you have to actually take that funding away in order for those disruptors, like the private sector and other actors, to come in to find those solutions in an environment in which the kind of that creative destruction approach. So the old institutions start to decay as the new ones are developed, but is there ways to accelerate that, and how do you invite that in? And again, we came back around to creating trust, and so when we ended on how do you start to create that trust, and there was that kind of Axelrod, you know, interaction after interaction, and what works over time, and being able to double down on, you have to get out there and try that, and you have to do it over and over again, and the trust builds, again, ground up, not top down. So did I miss anything, team?
I love that. Thank you, everybody. Round of applause for them. You're right. You are making me think, you know, Sweden has really leaned into this approach, right, of a private sector-led approach, a more sustainable approach. Maybe we'll hear some of those themes picked up when we hear from the private, from the sustainable financing table as well. Should we go to them next, Amanda?
Yes, we can. Emily? Okay.
Thanks. I'll get us started, and let me start by saying that this was a very rich discussion with a terrifically informed group of people, to which I will in no way do justice. But I think a couple of really big themes came out. One is we're starting from the point where we're talking about innovative financing, but there's only a certain extent to which innovation can overcome volume. And we live in a world in which debt is still an enormous issue, and we're seeing a massive retrenchment on many of the large sources of financing. And so although we're trying to deal with that in part by innovating new ways of generating finance, we shouldn't imagine that that's an easy fix for that piece. So then second, we need to think about how we are bringing in new sources of funding, and that's everything from engaging high net worth individuals and philanthropies more effectively to bringing in different tiers of financial actors. One of the points made was that you know, many of them have very different needs in terms of to what extent they need de-risking versus having greater liquidity options and so forth, and that perhaps some of the mechanisms we have for leveraging private finance now, which focus very much on de-risking, may not be entirely fit for purpose and need to be broadened. That leads to a third point, which is, you know, back to the future of multilateralism, is the UN and other structures around our development institutions themselves fit for purpose if what we're doing is mobilizing finance in very different ways. They were built around large-scale concessional finance and loans, and it's a real question. We're seeing some very tough reforms within bilateral agencies now. It's a real question as to whether, you know, literally the personnel of some of those organizations are the teams that you would put together if you were trying to bring those innovative financing pieces together. And then the fourth area that I felt was really powerfully coming out was around the ownership in country of how these funds are then directed. There are still major sources of overlap and duplication. We heard some great examples of where, for instance, in the case of Rwanda, some responses have worked really well, some others where it's been very challenging, having different agencies with overlapping competencies conflicting. And so having ways in which that country ownership is reinforced is going to be important.
Thank you very much, Rob. It was a great discussion. Just as a complement, we started the discussion with the issue of how to build additional volumes of pipelines of projects which meet the requirements of public and private financiers in terms of risk, return, liquidity, and impact. And this is a key question for the UN and the development partners world today. As you know, there is no shortage of private capital available, but there is a shortage of pipelines that meet this requirement. And one of the key recommendations that was discussed here was, okay, there is a lot of excellent experiences on the ground, but not enough scale up. And we discussed the issue of standardization of models of blended finance and the work done by Convergence Blended Finance as an example. And just wanted to highlight the importance of working on making a better use of this scarce concessional finance to develop these additional pipelines of bankable projects at the country level. And this is something which we can all work on based on a better coordination at the country level. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive, a great discussion. Thanks for sharing that with everybody else. Let's see, what other table? How about the table? Oh, we have a table here ready. Amanda, you can bring the mic to the front. And this is technology as an enabler and co-designer.
Hi, so I'll try to summarize a very intense discussion that had many elements, and I would start with, and Julie, I'll give you the mic afterwards, the key challenges. And there was consensus on the table that tech is being considered a magic tool, and tech is being brought in a solution like tech for the sake of tech, and how the beneficiary engagement is missing in the thinking of tech and its implementation. And this was like the main driver for the solutions that we were thinking of, that we brought in. And one aspect that has been really important is that the system thinking is missing in the whole process, and that leaders who need to collaborate speak different languages, and how to bring the common ground or common language, and how even AI can use to make this translation. When we were talking about solutions, we had a long discussion on when AI can plug in the solution process, right? If we have time to wait and then implement AI after developing, being more advanced in the process, or if it should come in early because there's no time. And it was actually also a consensus that we don't want to band-aid, and we really need comprehensive solutions, and that we need to stop bringing in different technologies in different places to just stop the bleeding, so to say. We need to take the time, bring in the thinking, the deep system thinking in the solution, and then bring in technology and innovation to be helping to accelerate. And we see technology and innovation as like a driver for solutions and to bring in positivity in the process. Trust was brought in as a key solution, building trust, listening to the different voices, and listening to the regional voices. So deciding from a global perspective is not enough. You have to work on the ground, listen to the people, and then develop solutions, and then go up to global and back and adapt, etc. So this seems like a cycle that we heard has to be considered for solutions and its implementation. So summarizing the actionable recommendations is leadership across the sectors need to be thinking systems and develop these languages and listen and understand each other. And then we bring in AI or different technologies to help. That we need those projects that are outcome-oriented and showcase what's possible, and that the stakeholders need to be at the table in decision-making process, and the people on the ground. So decision makers at the table and the people on the ground, so that we can guarantee success. And a word that I liked very much is also positive regulation. So this would support the process and accelerate the implementation. I give over to Julie, because you had a great closing sentence at the end. So maybe you can repeat it because it was really...
I think our close together was to say that we need to redefine what partnerships in the ecosystem of multilateralism are, and that means bringing them to the table early, co-defining what those requirements are, but driving towards a shared outcome. And I think that's different than what we have today. We purchase tech, we invest in tech, we use it as a Band-Aid, but I would really challenge if we're partnering for tech, with tech, for a shared outcome. Unless we do that, this ecosystem is never going to develop in the right way. Thank you.
Thank you. We are going to get more into that topic in our final remarks, but I want to go to the cities table. Where's our cities table? All the way in the back. Cities, civil society, and the power of networked multilateralism.
It's a maze to get through here. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Raj. Again, like I said, cannot do justice to this whole conversation. Also, resident young person, if I look older than 26, it's because I research world order and work with civil society, so it's aged me. So we started with the idea of like, how do we reimagine multilateralism with cities, right? And the key thing was, well, firstly, we spiraled on that a little bit and we were like, too big of a question. So what do we know about the current state of multilateralism? We know that we can't have unilateral multilateralism. If one country pulls out, the whole system can't collapse. So if we start with that, then we know that we need to have a new grand bargain. This is a conversation that I'm sure this group had, others had as well. But we also know that that can't be a 1945 San Francisco political elites come together, sign a document, grand bargain. That's where the cities, NGOs, civil society organizations come in. Because the new grand bargain has to come from the bottom up. It has to start from those grassroots activists and actors. So then the question is how? Right? Because that sounds wonderful in concept. Three main things that we'll quickly summarize, and then you can pick the brains of these incredible people later if you disagree, not me. The first thing is we need to build a global constituency, right? So far, we have people working in verticals. You have the health people, the tech people, the gender people, kind of people working in thematic constituencies. But we don't really have a constituency of people that care about global reform, that care about the multilateral system working together. How are we pulling those actors together at the city level, the civil society level? Because these networks are organized, they're just not talking to each other. Secondly, decentralized coordination. So it's, you know, we always say, what does the UN bring to the table? It brings the table. That's fantastic, but the table can't live in New York, right? We leave multiple tables in multiple different cities, in multiple different regions, but how are we then using systems like the UN and like the G20 to connect those power systems and power-making structures, decision-making tables together? So we talk about we need more youth at the table, fantastic, I agree, but it's also about taking tables to those young people to allow them to do decision-making. So decentralized coordination. And finally, recognizing the resource capital that these organizations bring. We're talking about budget cuts. We're talking about we have so much to do and so little capacity to do them. But here are these cities, networks, NGOs, organizations willing to do something without being asked to engage in those processes. So I think, you know, we talked about recognizing expertise beyond the Western model of expertise. We talked about thinking about how can we engage people that are willing to engage in productive ways so we're not just duplicating the conversation again and again. So those three things that I'll leave you with. And I'll also, Raj, you mentioned you were with global women leaders, Susanna Malcora, Helen Clark, Irina Bokova, on their Madam Secretary General campaign. I think there was like resounding kind of agreement that we really need to see Madam Secretary General show up next year.
Hear, hear. Okay, we've got one last table to go. Future-proofing operating models.
So we went last because we're a summary of all of the things that you have all said already. We started, and I'm holding you from, I think, cocktails, right? So I have to be short. We started by saying trying to define what multilateralism is, and I think that we don't have a common definition anymore. For some, it's a coalition of the willing, grand bargains. For some, it's an absolute necessity because there are problems that individual nations cannot solve. There are global problems. And then for others, it's worked. It has been the core of stability while it has existed. So multilateralism is important, but there wasn't a common agreement as to how it's going to look going forward. The key challenges, many that you've already said. So financing, being in agreement on this definition of multilateralism, we have to know what we're building. We don't really know yet. The inflexibility of structures and their kind of inability to change with time. Things change very, very fast now with technology. Our institutions are not changing. The complexity, in particular, of the UN, but not only, the complexity of these institutions leads to, mandate creep, it leads to duplication, it leads to a lot of inefficiency. There was a discussion of how so many decisions are political and not objective, that we're not making decisions by objective criteria. We're not hiring by objective criteria. We're hiring by geographic locations. And if we had common objective criteria, anyone, the best person from anywhere could apply and take the jobs. And then lastly, lack of trust. There is a lack of legitimacy, I think. You talked about it with the younger generation, but it probably goes beyond that. That lack of legitimacy is also because of the lack of participation of some nation states in some of the institutions. We had a big debate about whether you should expand the Security Council or not. In terms of solutions, I would say number one was go back to basics. Define the very basic mandate in order to make this less complex, in order to bring the people in your organization into understanding why they're there, what their motives are, what the objectives are. So people at the center of the organization. Also, the intergenerational work. We talked about the need to bring in younger people for decision making, but also communications between generations. It's not like set the younger people in another room and the older people in this room. The public-private partnerships in terms of financing, that is the biggest kind of discussion about how not to rely solely on states, which is what the Finance Committee came up with there. But also, we have private foundations, we have large NGOs, we have private sector companies here, and UN and state and members. And so everyone believes that we could do a lot more if we had more unique, more creative financing. I guess the last element is tech. There's no question that tech is a solution, but as you described, you need to make sure that it's tied to the mandate. And so the actionable recommendations were to put in place better HR rules that were more objective criteria and not, what country you come from alone. To build a more effective business case, a much more effective business case, because to create that legitimacy, every one of these organizations is going to need to, quote, draw a direct line between what they're doing and the constituencies to make people in countries understand what the value is. We're not communicating what the institutions are doing for the average person in the world. You won't be surprised at this one. Age and gender limits for the Secretary General, amongst others. We won't even speak about the US system. So that was another tag to the female Madam Secretary. Standardization of KPIs. How do we judge whether we're successful or not? You can't monitor if you don't have KPIs. Which KPIs are we monitoring? How does an employee understand what his objective is if they don't know what the KPIs are that they're being judged upon? And bringing people, again, people into the decision-making process. So how do you not have managers deciding, but everyone participating in it? The example was like a people parliament. How do you bring more people into the discussion, not just the experts? And that's it. Oh, sorry. Beth has more.
If I can just steal 1 minute, just everything you said was perfect and a great discussion here at this table. I just felt that whole line on people came through so much. And the other thing that came through is that, some people have seen the reports that have come out for the UN80 initiative, and some people think, there are things in there that make sense with what we've talked about, consolidation, looking at mandates, etc. But one thing that came through is that it's not, that we feel that things are not bold enough. They need to be bolder to be able to actually kind of move this a little bit. And for the people who we are serving, the line is we the peoples, so we need the people more present. And I just wanted to flag 2 things that are going on that you may be interested in, may help with some of this discussion, may provide some more food for thought. So there was a report actually that came out, a paper that came out actually today, I think, and it's called Survival or Renewal. And it's been written by 2 people who were in a network within the UN called the Young UN Network. And they have some really interesting ideas and some really provocative questions that I think people in this room may have a lot of things to add to. We also have an initiative which is called Transformative Spaces. My colleague here, Liliana, is the genius behind this. And this is really actually trying to set up different types of space for different types of collaboration, bringing on all of the different stakeholders that we've talked about, and looking at how might we make decisions differently. It's it's kind of experimental. We have a lot of sessions going on, so that's something we can provide some information about if you're interested.
Thank you so much. Can I just say, we started this evening off, and I think everybody, for good reason, feels a little bit down about the state of the world, and we all raised our hands that we think things are going to go pretty badly in terms of UN reform. This was inspirational to me, hearing all of you, hearing the conversations, really dynamic discussions as I popped around tables. So I just want to say a big thank you to all of you. You lifted my spirits. We've got a couple more remarks before we head to cocktails and food. I want to ask Eric Polofsky, if he wouldn't mind, to come up for a moment, because this is the space you live in every day as a vice president of the Rockefeller Foundation. So just some brief thoughts, if you would. Amanda, I think, has a microphone for you. As we start to wrap up the evening, I'd love to get your final thoughts there.
Sure. Sorry, I thought we were going to sit down. So, no, it's all right. It's all right. I'll fake it. So, look, I think we're clear about the challenges. Whether it's extreme weather, debt, pandemics, conflict, AI. I think the question we've been asking ourselves tonight is, are these solvable? And whether multilateralism has a relationship to those solutions. And I think at the Rockefeller Foundation, we, of course, the instinctive answer is yes. But I think we're more data-driven than that. And so we've started a conversation that we announced actually today. Well, we announced it Thursday, but then, the magic of UNGA, so we announced it multiple times. That's not an unusual practice for governments. But we're calling it Build the Shared Future. And one of the key questions that it's looking at is the question of international cooperation. And so to kick it off, we had a conversation this morning, but we also had a poll that asked a lot of questions about international cooperation. And I thought it would be a little bit interesting to sort of walk you through pieces of that, because I think it's a really interesting take. We did it in 34 countries, 36,000 people. It's not a small poll. There's a lot of depth there that we're still digging into. And I encourage you to go look at it on our web. It's not really an advertisement, but if I didn't advertise it, I'd probably be fired. So please don't get me fired, but for that or anything else. We asked people, do they really interact with the global economy, with the international affairs? Do they see their lives as connected? And I think you should, that's a graph that you should really look at, because we thought the conversation of starting with, hey, what do you think about international cooperation, seemed like a pretty dumb place to start. We thought, what is the degree to which people feel their lives impacted by things well beyond their city, their county, their state, their province, their country boundaries. And what we came up with, or what they came up with, was maybe. I mean, that's magic, right? Like, thanks, we did a poll, the answer is maybe. It's actually not maybe, it's yes, but. And the yes was that 55% of surveyed individuals believe that international cooperation is okay, that they support it, even if it means compromising some national interests. Like, that's not an unremarkable conclusion, right? Like, that's not saying we support international cooperation if, in fact, like, it's for us. Well, okay. We actually asked a trade-off question. Are you okay with it if it means giving up something that's, quote, in your national interest? And so not everything in national interest, some national interest. That's hopeful, right? Like, that's genuinely hopeful. But, here's the but, 37% think it's important, international cooperation is important, but shouldn't override national interests. 20% think it's useful in some areas, but often ineffective. 6% think it's generally waste of time and resources. That's not insignificant, right? Those are real numbers. That's a significant cohort of the people that were polled. But there's a second but. The second but actually goes the other way. There is a path. And if you look at the numbers, you see that people will support international cooperation if it's proven effective, much more actually than if it's inexpensive. Like, they're actually more in favor of it if it works than what's the price tag. And the second is if it's perceived to serve them or their household. That goes to something that we were talking about in our group. Is there a through line between international cooperation over here and my daily life? And I think, unfortunately, not just the UN, I'm not picking on the UN, I think lots of us who work on international affairs, let's set Devex over here, don't talk enough in digestible, resonant, salient ways about what international cooperation or what multilateralism can do. And so what the heck does all this mean, right? Like, and sorry that I'm between you and drinks. I apologize. Just 4 more points. What the heck does it mean? One, it means that if we're going to do international cooperation, it has to deliver. Number 2, it has to attempt hard things even at the risk of failure. I've been in conversations, I think some of you from the one that I'm going to mention, where people said, well, what if we blue-hatted a Ukraine peacekeeping force? And there was like an audible gasp. Like, you can't do that. Here's the thing. I don't know whether it's the right solution or not, but ruling it out because it's too risky means that the UN isn't doing hard things. UN does hard things every day, but there are some core things to what people believe is important. And if you look at the study, the list starts with peace and stability. That is head and shoulders above what everybody else, every other option for what do you want international cooperation to deliver. So when it comes to, maybe it's not a blue hat force in Ukraine when the war is over, hopefully tomorrow, but not likely, then we should be considering it because multilateralism or international cooperation should be taking on hard things. I would just say, number 3, we've got to stop using the word multilateralism to save multilateralism. Doing it is going to save multilateralism. Not talking about it, not figuring out how to, like, the list of things to, quote, save multilateralism. That is not going to get us there. And then 4th, we need to draw a through line between international cooperation and daily lives. And so I urge you to dig into this poll. I urge you, if you're interested, Rockefeller's kicked off a process to have a conversation about international cooperation, to try to we are seeing the collapse of a number of things, a collapse of ODA, a collapse of some of the, what people would call the international liberal order. we're trying to think about how and foster a global conversation on what comes next. And so if that's of interest to you, I encourage you to reach out. I encourage you to participate in it, whether we're involved or not, because this is how we're going to take on those problems.
Thank you so much, Art. That was fantastic. I knew you would be fantastic. Thank you. The drinks are also going to be great, but even better, just before we go there, you saw his face on the picture on the screen before. I'm going to make him come up and say a few words. He wasn't able to come then, but he's here now. Alexander de Croo is with us. He was the Prime Minister of Belgium, as you all know. He's also a candidate for UNDP administrator, which means he is a glutton for punishment. He's willing to take on a very tough job and wants it, in fact. So maybe just a brief word as we close, Alexander, as to, you look at the state of the UN, the state of the situation, and you're running for it. Why is that? What do you see as the opportunity?
Thank you. I'm going to be now the third person saying that I'm in between of the cocktails and you. Thank you, Raj. And first of all, my apologies. I had a mix-up in my agenda. There's many things I try to do well. Managing my agenda, I'm actually not very good at it. It seems. Interesting things that I heard in the 15 minutes sitting here. I think you told about being more bold in UN reform. I totally agree with that. I think that if we're not more bold in UN reform, we will have to do this again in 2 years or in 3 years' time. I mean, the cuts that we see in financing, thinking that they're going to be reversed, I would love to say the opposite, but it's not going to happen. I think the main assignment we have is to avoid that it's on a slippery slope, so let's stabilize it afterwards. Which leads, I think, to a few things where we have to go a bit further. I think on, let's call it the consolidation of entities, it's unavoidable that we go further in that. I mean, my team, we did the counting. The UN system in total has 144 entities, if you count everything. I mean, how do you explain that in your home constituencies? The mission creep is vast. Now, that's not going to happen by saying we're going to merge all of these in a span of 2 years' time. We need to find a way of cutting drastically in overhead. And I think the direction you need to go is that, as in the humanitarian sphere, you have one big entity that has feet on the ground. I think in development, you also need to have one entity that has presence everywhere, and all the others kind of need to plug into that organization. That seems to be the smart way of having the benefits, but not having a bloodbath that's going to take the next 3-4 years, and that is going to hamper us on our delivery of the service that we still need to do. That's the first element. The second element is, I think in everything we do in development, my experience, and I've been Minister of Development during 6 years, is that if you do not have local buy-in, you can have all the smartest people in the room, you can have all the innovative financing and whatever you call it, it's never going to lead to anything. And so everything we do always has to be pushing for local ownership, local ownership, local ownership, and local decision and strengthening the local capacity in everything we do. And can we assist in that? Yes. But should we take it over? No. And we have been doing that way too much in the past. And then maybe third element, and there's been some, I hear some talking about technology. I'm a big believer that the plus side of technology is much bigger than the potential downside. We still see it too often as a separate pillar. No, it needs to be across everything, and it needs to be implemented in everything we do. To finalize, I think that the criticism that the development world gets, we have to be fair, a part of that criticism is legitimate. I mean, we haven't really done a perfect job in being as effective as we can. We haven't done a great job in explaining our home public that this is actually good, sound investment. And I thought what you explained is very much in line with everything I've always felt. If you explain how it helps people in their daily concerns, that's already a big part. And actually it does, but we really haven't done a good job in doing that. So can UNDP be a part of that debate? I would love to. Will I be part of that? Obviously, I would say I would love to as well. But if it's not in UNDP, I'm sure I will be active in that domain, because this is, for me, a bit coming back to my first love. I've been doing this for 6 years. being Prime Minister was a bit of an intermezzo, so if I can come back to this world, I would love to, whatever organization it is. So thank you for being here, and then I can bring the good news, right? And that's the cocktail reception starts now. Thank you, Raj.
If there's an election here, if we get to vote, I think we can elect our next UNDP administrator. Unfortunately, it's not how it works. Listen, the story of multilateralism, it has not been written yet. Okay, we'll write it at Devex. We'll be working on this, but it hasn't been written yet. You will help us write that. You've helped us tonight. You will all play a role in what that future is. Thought partners like EY. Thank you, Julie Teigland. Thank you, the whole team at EY, for making this event possible. And thank you to all of you. Thank you to all of you for putting in your time and effort to be a part of this great discussion tonight. Now it's time for those cocktails and the food. Have a great time. Thanks, everybody.